Welcome to the Study Abroad podcast. Today, we're diving into one of the most popular study destinations, New Zealand. If you're a student from Bangladesh, Nepal, Vietnam, or India, and you're considering studying abroad, New Zealand offers some amazing opportunities.
Okay, so if you've ever thought about studying in New Zealand, one of the first things that I think anybody thinks about is, can I work while I'm there, and how much can I actually earn?
Exactly.
Right, and can I sort of make ends meet?
Right.
While I'm studying there?
It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a huge question.
For sure.
And so that's what we're going to dive into today on the deep dive.
Awesome.
We're going to look at part-time work for international students in New Zealand.
Okay.
And we're going to break it down by, if you're doing an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, or even a PhD.
Sounds good.
What are the opportunities? Like, how much can you earn? And what are the rules around it? Yeah. All that kind of stuff.
For sure.
So to help me unpack all of this, I've got an expert in all things New Zealand student life.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Really excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's kick things off with just the ground rules.
Yep. Okay.
If I'm an international student and I go to New Zealand on a student visa,
right,
how many hours am I actually allowed to work?
Okay, so basically the rule is with a student visa, you can work for up to 20 hours a week.
Okay.
During the semesters when you're studying.
Got it.
But then during the holidays, you can work full-time.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and so that 20-hour limit during the semester is really to make sure that students can, focus on their studies.
Right. Makes sense.
But obviously, it does give them a really good opportunity to earn some money and help with the, day-to-day costs.
Exactly. Cool. So we got 20 hours a week during the semesters, full-time during the holidays.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So let's zoom in on undergrads first.
Okay.
What is the, in terms of cost of tuition and living expenses?
Yeah.
If I'm an undergrad going to New Zealand, what am I looking at spending per year?
Right. So in terms of tuition fees, generally, you're going to be looking at anywhere between about 22,000 New Zealand dollars up to about 32,000 per year.
Okay.
For your tuition.
Got it.
And then on top of that, you've got your living costs.
Yeah.
So that's things like your accommodation, your food.
Right.
You transport all of that.
Yeah.
And that could be anywhere between sort of $15,000 to $20,000 a year as well.
Wow. Okay.
And that does vary a lot depending on where you live and what kind of lifestyle you have.
Right. Okay. So that's a decent chunk of change.
It is.
So given that 20 hours a week of work.
Yeah.
Can an undergrad realistically cover both those things just from working part-time?
That's a really good question, and it's something that a lot of students, I think, hope that they can do.
Yeah.
But realistically, it's very difficult for an undergraduate student to cover all of their costs just with a part-time job.
Oh, okay.
While it can make a big contribution to living costs,
right?
Things like your rent, your food, getting around, those kinds of things. It's unlikely that they'd be able to pay for the full tuition as well, just with that income.
Right. Okay, so you're probably going to need some savings or family support.
Exactly, or scholarships.
Or scholarships, ideally.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so, working is good, but it's not going to cover everything.
Yeah.
For an undergrad.
It's a good way to supplement your income.
Exactly. So what kind of jobs do undergrads typically end up doing in New Zealand?
Right. So some of the most common areas where undergraduate students find work are hospitality.
Okay.
So things like being wait staff in cafes and restaurants, baristas, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Retail is another big one.
Okay.
So working in supermarkets or just various retail stores.
Right.
And customer service.
Yeah.
Which a lot of that is in call centers.
Got it.
And these kinds of jobs are good for students because the hours are often quite flexible.
Yeah.
So you can work around your classes.
Right.
And also, they don't necessarily require you to have a lot of previous work experience.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's a good way to get into the workforce.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So what about, for students who are maybe studying something a bit more specialized, like IT or engineering or business?
Yep.
Are there opportunities for them to find something a bit more aligned to their studies?
Yeah, absolutely. There definitely are opportunities for students in those kinds of fields to get part-time work that's related to what they're studying.
Cool.
So that might be, internships or sort of entry-level project work.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Got it.
They might be a bit more competitive to get.
Right.
But obviously the benefits are huge, not just because you're earning money, but you're also getting experience in your field.
Yeah.
You're making contacts.
Right.
And, you're setting yourself up for
yeah.
potentially better paid jobs.
And you might even get offered a job at the end of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
If you do a good job.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's a much smarter way
to approach the whole, part-time work thing.
Yeah, I agree.
If you can.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So, okay, let's move on to master's students.
Right.
Is this situation sort of similar for them, or is it a bit different?
So for master's students, there are a few differences.
Okay.
So firstly, the tuition fees for master's programs can often be a bit higher than undergraduate degrees.
Right.
But a lot of the time, the structure of master's programs gives you a bit more flexibility.
Yeah.
In terms of your class schedule.
Right.
And your overall workload.
Okay.
So that could mean that master's students might be able to work.
Yeah.
A few more hours potentially while still staying within the visa limits.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a bit more flexibility there.
Yeah.
But potentially higher fees.
Yeah.
Do you think they still need additional financial help?
Generally, yes.
Okay.
I think while they might be able to work a bit more,
right,
those higher tuition fees
yeah,
often mean that they'll need some other kind of funding, whether that's savings or family support or scholarships.
right.
But one of the big advantages for master's students is that they've got more advanced knowledge and skills.
Right.
So they're often more competitive for better paid part-time jobs.
Yeah.
And they might even be able to find part-time jobs that are more related to their field of study.
Totally. Yeah, because they've developed more specialized skills at that point.
Exactly.
You mentioned before, like, research assistantships and internships.
Yeah.
Are those the kinds of things that master's students would maybe have access to?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, those kinds of roles are great for master's students.
Yeah.
They give you, real world experience in your area of study, but they also often come with some kind of financial compensation.
Right.
So a stipend or, some kind of payment.
Got it.
And that can really help to offset living costs and sometimes even tuition fees.
Yeah, and plus, you're developing your CV, you're making connections.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's kind of like a win-win.
For sure.
Cool. All right, so let's move on to PhD students.
Right.
Now, this is obviously,
It's a whole other kettle of fish.
Kettle of fish, exactly.
Yeah.
So how does the sort of financial side of things look for PhD candidates?
Right. So it's often quite different for PhD students.
Okay.
A lot of PhD programs in New Zealand offer stipends or scholarships that are designed to help cover living costs.
Okay.
And in some cases, that funding might also include full or partial coverage of tuition fees.
Right.
But the exact amount of funding that you get can really vary. It depends on the university, the program, and the type of scholarship.
Right.
So it's something that you really need to research carefully.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I guess, for undergrads and master's students, it's kind of like they're looking to work part-time to supplement their finances. But for PhD students, it sounds like there's often like a
dedicated
funding stream. Yeah.
Does that mean that they don't work part-time generally?
So while the main financial support often comes from those stipends,
right.
Some PhD students do actually choose to work part-time.
Okay.
But it really depends how much time they have and what the demands of their research are.
Right. Makes sense.
But there are often opportunities within universities that are specifically for PhD students.
Okay.
So, for example, they might be able to tutor undergraduate students.
Right.
Or they might be able to assist professors with research projects.
That's cool.
And this is great because not only does it give them some extra income, but it also gives them really valuable experience.
Yeah.
For their CV and teaching and research.
So I guess for PhD students, it's not so much about just general part-time work, but finding stuff that's kind of
aligned with.
Yeah, it's more about professional development.
Exactly.
At that stage.
Awesome. Okay. So that's, that's really interesting to hear about all the different levels.
Yeah.
So, what kind of general advice would you give to any international student who's, thinking about studying in New Zealand and wants to be like financially prepared and increase their chances of finding a part-time job?
Okay. So my number one piece of advice would be start planning early.
Okay.
Don't leave it till the last minute.
Yeah.
Start well before you get to New Zealand.
Okay.
Do your research.
Yeah.
Find out, how much it costs to live in the city that you're going to. Create a budget. look at different accommodation options.
Yeah.
And just be really mindful of your spending.
Okay.
Try and avoid unnecessary expenses.
Yeah.
Particularly when you first arrive.
Right.
And then once you do get to New Zealand,
yeah,
don't wait to start looking for work.
Yeah.
Get out there as soon as possible.
Right.
And be open to trying different kinds of roles.
Yeah.
You know, your first job in New Zealand might not be your dream job.
Yeah.
But it will give you some income
Yeah.
and some experience.
Totally.
Yeah.
And experience in the New Zealand
Yeah.
job market.
Exactly.
That's really great advice.
Hopefully helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess as well, like, utilize the resources that are available
Yes.
at the universities.
Yeah. Most universities have career services.
Yeah.
They often have job boards.
Yeah.
You know, on-campus employment programs.
You're right.
So that's a really good place to start.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess, big picture,
Yeah.
part-time work can definitely contribute to your living expenses.
Yes.
But it's probably not realistic to think you can cover everything.
Yeah. Particularly tuition fees.
Especially tuition.
Yeah.
And I guess PhD students are a slightly different story.
They are. Yeah.
Yeah.
They often have dedicated funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So, we've covered a lot today.
We have.
Any final words of wisdom?
I think I would just encourage anyone who's thinking of studying in New Zealand
Yeah.
to really think about what balance they want
Yeah.
between working and studying.
Right.
What are your priorities
Exactly.
for this experience?
Yeah.
Because once you know what your priorities are,
Yeah.
you can make better decisions
Exactly.
about your finances and your time.
That's such good advice.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Yeah.
it's helpful.
It is. If you're listening to this and you're, thinking about studying in New Zealand,
Yeah.
this has been a
I
really
hope so.
insightful chat.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to the Deep Dive.
Yes.
We do deep dives on all sorts of topics.
All kinds of things.
So, yeah, hit that subscribe button.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been a pleasure.
Really appreciate your expertise.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you later.